Thanks a lot, Florian, for this invitation and the chance to speak about our common project. It's a huge topic, and I do not know if I could frame it in this short time to touch all things which are important. So I would like to speak shortly about this motivation, why data sharing matters. And I would like to present our project. We have two ways to think about it: how to share data and how to use data. We will speak about practical implications. We have challenges, but we should also think about this career perspective, which our project should offer. And perhaps at the end, we can discuss the future of data sharing and possible visions. Let me start simply. If we ask how to train the next generation, we should also ask what kind of science do we want the next generation to practice. And you know, we have these two extreme poles, this very individual-oriented, achievement-oriented way of the genius scientist who is doing the big discovery. But on the other side, we have collective endeavors, we have collective activities to bring science to a better stage. And in a way, clinical data sits between the two things. We have very society-related, community-related aspects, like the people who enter this data to our studies. And we have still this very clinician-oriented view, keeping data protected beyond institutional walls and not showing it easily to others. And let's just remember these two kinds of science. Here on the left side, the genius, which gives to the society important insights and improves life of a society. On the left side, you have a mural of Diego Rivera. It's on the walls of the Institute for Cardiology in Mexico, where you have where you have science as something with collective responsibilities and, in a way, also communal benefits. And it's funny that Isaac Newton invented, or the saying is contributed to Isaac Newton, standing on the shoulders of giants. You know what it means for his kind of doing science. But in a way, it is also a nice analogy to data sharing, because instead of just using the findings, the literature, the publications of former scientists to go a step ahead, we should use the original data blocks, building blocks, the patient-level data, and which is provided by predecessors of this. And we have a lot of issues which are a little bit related to community.
Francesco, a scuola io lo vado a prendere alle 3:30.
Okay. And perhaps this is a weird association now. I don't know if you know Joseph Beuys. He is one of our most famous artists. And he was very concerned about how society, how communities are working. And he wants to have a common process of creation. He has communication, cooperation, common action, participation, co-creation, a lot of things which give life to a society he tried to express in his art. And here you see a very famous activity of his. He planted in Kassel, which is a German town, where you have this famous art exhibition Documenta, 7,000 oaks, and he combined each oak tree with a stone. Now you can just see like data points, which are stones, and trees, which create new knowledge that grows from the data, the community who is setting up this possibility. But the good thing is that it's called social sculpture, and it changed the city of Kassel totally. And in a way, it shows how collective action shapes society. You had this many individual contributions and new collective works with a lasting impact has grown, and in a way, data sharing works in a similar way. Now let's get a little bit more serious. We have a lot of philosophical reasons why data sharing matters. You have Karl Popper with a lot of epistemic reason, falsification, improvement of our knowledge bases. There are a lot of ethical reasons because patients contribute data, and they hope that this would provide broader societal benefit. You may have economic reasons, efficiency, where duplication of efforts can be reduced, discovery can be accelerated, innovation can be fostered. You may have also the reason not to get too stiff with your knowledge. Facts should not become black boxes. You should make more visible why they came up, and you should open these black boxes and these insights for inspection. Bruno Latour, the famous French philosopher who died 2022 and who made the statement, you have a lot of community-oriented aspects of science. You can look at the work of Robert Merton, where he says norms of science are commonality, universalism, disinterestedness, organized skepticism, and so on. So you have a lot of thinking behind this change of approaching scientific activities, but you know there are limits, and how to say, in spite of these limits, we should go this way because data sharing expands the capabilities of our insights and we should we should try to engage in informed debate, and in ways is also a kind of democratic approach. We have to admit it's not actually this what is called zeitgeist at the moment. The funny thing is, this was a Nature paper just a few days ago, that actually the Trump administration likes open science and likes open access and data sharing, but they see it more as a nice tool to control. So this would be a little bit the dark side of the whole thing. So if we take all this together, we built our ideas for the Share CTT project, and we thought that data sharing is a scientific virtue, and it's a modern embodiment of this falsifiability. And it also holds to consolidate and extend knowledge. So we had this little scheme, what you see on the right, which in a way shows what goes in data sharing and what these sharing activities produce. And what we have seen as the key components to train is some technical literacy, ethical sensitivity, a collaborative mindset, scientific thinking, just to foster critical scrutiny, transparency, collaboration. And you need these critical skills. You have to know, you should not share every kind of data. You should know when not to share and what are risks which come up, for example, for patients, which are not so good. And so data sharing is not an add-on of normal scientific activity. Our idea was it is increasing and strengthening research integrity, and it's a new way of doing research. So we come to Share CTT. We have been able to write a kind of our plan and activities in a short comment paper in Nature Medicine in 2023. This was when we failed for the first time with our application at the EU. And then we got on a second try our funding, and we could start in January 2024. You have some time to prepare everything, to register and get your students, which started in fall 2024, and we have to end of 2027. So you see here 9 universities which are taking care of about 11 students. We have some partners, and since some of the people here, like this Hôpital Civique de Lyon or Utrecht, they are more medical centers which are not universities, and so the PhD will be granted by respective universities related to the centers. So this is a little bit the structure which we try to develop. And actually we had these 2 aspects, or these 2 dimensions. There is one way one have to think about how to provide data for sharing. And the funny thing is that now people from our DCs, this is Kahin, he is in Rennes, was able to formulate a program how to do this and how to do it in a good way, which will be published soon in the Journal of Clinical Epidemiology. And the second perspective would be, so if you have data which is shared with you, how you should use it. And this is also Julia from Rennes, our second DC. She is with, I think, Dr. Locher, but yeah, she has also written a paper which is in a way under review at the moment in clinical epidemiology. And here we have a nice way to, nice statements for our ideas, what we do. And okay, we would like to teach good practice, but we would also like to teach our people to understand and to explore the impact of data sharing. So there is a theory of data sharing and the practice of clinical data sharing, which we somehow summarized in a hierarchy of competencies, which are presented here on the left side. We like to start with understanding the challenges, leverages, and problems. We would like to understand the 4 pillars of data sharing, which have been shown in this figure before: principles, governance, skills, and operations. Then we would like to have this best practice aspect on providing data to be shared and to request data for sharing. Then how this fits into a broader vision of meta-research, and how can we use this meta-research to demonstrate the relevance of our activities, and then to have a translation into the community, and then even to be active as role models for this advanced access to the clinical trial data sharing. The funny thing is, and we didn't know about this, that at the same time, the reporting guidelines of Spirit and Consort prepared clear statements about data sharing, and they made it in a way now obligatory in this reporting lists. By Spirit, it's item 4 to 6, and by Consort, it's item 4. And so this gives our activities a big push, because declaring now clinical trial data sharing is a kind of norm and not a nice add-on. And so Spirit 22 would like to implement data sharing thinking in the protocol phase. So here you should plan how to share your data, how to share code, materials, and how you will make it accessible, your data. So this is also important for informed consent of the patient. And they, in a way, should write a data sharing plan as part of the protocol. And if you go to the consort, it's simply now the data are there, and you should be very clear in how access this data and how to share it and how to provide it for other interested scientists. Okay, let's go to this first issue, how to provide data for sharing. And there's a lot of things people have to understand and to, how to say, see as a normal way to approach aspects. So you need a lot of things regarding data management. So you have to gain an understanding what is data quality and data consistency. You should learn about error correction, completeness, standardization. So you should work with the data you would like to share. And then you have to provide a very good documentation for this data, which is in the informatic language, the metadata, code books, data dictionaries. You have to write provenance, measurement methods. You should provide information about the versioning and so on. And you should know a lot about how to share data in a safe way. So you have to learn about anonymization, data protection, the legal basis, what are risk assessments, how to discuss risk assessments. And then you need a lot of technicalities. What are file formats, file structures? How do you implement interoperability in a good way? And then at the end, you have to learn all these legal and ethical aspects when you start this task in doing data sharing. And of course, you should learn what are good places where you can put your data to share it, which is related to repositories, but you should have an idea what is necessary to provide this long-term accessibility, what is a quality repository, and to go on. And again, so we see it under the, how to say, umbrella of the FAIR principles. And this is what Kahin described in this text, which will be published or is already published in the Journal of Clinical Epidemiology. So, and at this point, one should understand, even as data sharer, but as well as data user, how to set up data sharing agreements. And there's a nice basic template, say, generic structure, which is presented in these 9 points, and which are important to understand and to fill with content. So, for example, we did some data sharing activities, for example, with Yoda, and there was a big issue from our legal department. What happens if a company has an advantage of your activities, of your secondary analyses, when they would improve, for example, commercial advantages for the products? So how should this be provided in a contract? Because there are European laws which force you to consider this and to find a fair interaction between the data provider and the data user. This is a problem I haven't thought about before, and which came up to a big debate. Yeah, perhaps we are able to learn more about this. So we have, like, the time you are provided with this data. The data sharing agreement tells, okay, you have 1 year to have a free use of it. Later on, you have to pay. In Wifli, you have to pay for each 3 months about 300 euros more. And if we look at our situation, we write a project, we write the paper, and then we enter the review phase of the paper, which is in a way unpredictable long. It may take 1 year or half year. And also, this kind of aspects should be considered in the data sharing agreements, for example, here in duration and termination. For example, with Wifli, we could define periods where we just close our agreement. So we set a 3-month period where we do not use the data, we don't have to pay, but then it starts again. So things like this are important. And it's also important to learn how to formulate data sharing statements for papers, because they have to reflect a lot of things which are related to the data sharing agreement. And this is also a kind of generic template here. You have to write something about the availability, the conditions, who is responsible, who is initiating the data sharing with you, and how you will access this. So this is also something which is not always very nicely presented in papers. So here we are now at this switch point. We had to provide data. We had some documents to get the process going. We have to announce it somehow. And now we have to use data which is shared and shareable. And this is also a lot of challenges. And it's not always very easily feasible. And many processes are still not in a good balance between the feasibility and the openness you would like to have. So you have to handle data formats, you have to manage deployment processes, you have implementing secondary studies. All of these are steps you have to formulate. There are a lot of motivations, perhaps why you would like to have a data sharing agreement with somebody, reproducing results, robustness, reanalysis, post-publication review. You would like to have data to plan new clinical trials because you can learn a lot from this kind of data which is available, but this would require specific data sharing agreements, because then you would need, for example, center information. How fast is the center learning with a certain drug to handle? How long does it take to handle, for example, adverse events by learning? How to proceed. Okay, meta-analysis is something which is of big interest and have a lot of this IPD meta-analysis, which can be considered as breakthrough studies for data sharing. You can use it as methods development and, for example, also as validation activities. But in a way, this will enter in your data sharing agreement. So, and you have to understand the conditions of use. For example, how are embargoes, how are authorship expectations and obligations to acknowledge data provider. You have to check, is this data sure? You have to know, for example, if I work on a trusted environment, this is fine. But if you download the data to your place, what would be the necessary institutional and legal requirements to do this and to be compliant with your data security stuff? How could you implement secure storage, access control, and so on? And how to do privacy, respectation, how do you guarantee scientific integrity? How do you follow ethical responsibilities? And this is something funny. For example, if you have the data, you could be tempted to look at more, as you agreed. You could do starting cherry picking. And for example, here it's also a relationship to registered reports or registered protocols, registered scientific statistical analysis plans. For example, with Weavly, we have to do this in a very clear way. And actually, we have to formulate for Weavly, for our data sharing agreement, at least a 10-page plan of what we like to do and how we would like to do. And then we also have to think about dissemination. And in the publication, how to provide proper acknowledgement to data sources, how to share code, how to share derived data sets, and how to contribute back to the open science circle. So these are topics which we would like to address. And just if I look at my own interest, what we do at my place, we use data sharing, for example, for IPT meta-analysis, for surrogate endpoints in multiple sclerosis. We do a lot of reanalysis of multiple sclerosis prediction models. We validate prediction models, and we have a lot of findings which could now enter guidelines in multiple sclerosis treatment. And what is not easy, because it's not always very nice what we find out in our validation procedures. And I do not know if this what we find and try to implement in the clinical workup will also provide a clinical breakthrough. So this is also something we think about in our projects. So if you have your paper written and if you have your results, how to get it an impact. Okay, so this is actually the theoretical parts, and we thought at our place how we can train people in doing it. We have this trace environment, which is trusted research, access, and cooperation environment. So we use it to put all of the data which we are responsible here in my institute in a file system and make it accessible. So we have some technical infrastructure, we have a secure environment, and so we train people, for example, master students doing an internship, how to put studies in this environment. So they learn a lot about metadata and data management, technical aspects of file system, but also our doctoral students are often forced to go into our trusted research environment and do the analysis they do for the actually research paper on our system in this remoted and protected way. So in a way, we have here a little training environment for all these processes which I mentioned before. Okay, we have to think, this was one part, is this repository we use, is this clinical study data request, YODA, VFLI, or this trace good enough as a repository? And we have a nice checklist to look at this, which are the trust principles. And this also gives students a better understanding which kind of technical aspects they have to grasp and to go on. Another, say, practicing was a datathon or are datathons, which we planned in our ShareCTT project. We have 3 datathons. Here's the first one. The first one consisted in looking at the data of an older oncological study. We started with preparing it in November 2024, and we could perform it on site in July. Now we write a little paper about this. We had to do interaction with the original investigators. They helped us a lot. The event organizer had to set up the computing environment and so on. And the teams which did it, there have been 5 teams. They had to write statistical analysis plans, they had to download this, and they had to go through all these processes and aspects we discussed before. But in detail, so if you would put down the tasks that they had to do and to learn, there was this data management and preparation task. How do you access your data? Here, they just use their own computers. Clean data reproducibility, how to use the code books, how to use metadata aspects, and they had to handle some surprises there. So we teach them how to use reproducible and transparent workflows, how to do version controls, what is literate programming, what is Docker, and so on. They had to learn a lot of statistical and computational competences here. For example, statistical rigor. In a way, they had to pre-register the statistical analysis plan, and they had to apply core trial methods, and they also had to include sensitivity and, how to say, even reanalysis aspects. So they could train transparency and open science practices, how to share codes, how to make outputs, how to archive things, how to comply with the consort statement. And it was a very interesting and intense collaboration and communication experience, because we had a huge support by the surgeons and the study group who performed the whole thing. And we learned that the documents was not very clear. There have been some surprises. But now we try to write this paper and to present our experiences with the whole thing. Okay, I mentioned the cherry-picking issue and the pre-registration of your projects. I didn't go to a deeper discussion of it, but these are things we would like to intensify also by the coming further two data zones. Okay, so this was a little view on the practical aspects. So we're doing this very nice data sharing things. We are very optimistic. We think there are a lot of incentives for data sharing, but there are some incentives, but these incentives are not coupled at the moment with our academic reward system. And here we have a kind of weak point in our project. We look for the communication with our clinical peers. We have a partner in Berlin, the Charité. They are very much enforcing this kind of thinking when they look at candidates for new positions. But I think here is something which is still a big challenge. We have this ideal narrative, but we have this, on the one side, this publication bias with journals, which prioritize novel findings with original data. Secondary data analysis is not so easy. I think Florian, he knows the secret how to publish this kind of results in high-ranked journals like the BMJ. These are institutions which are very open to our thinking. We have this big recognition gap that, in a way, curating data and preparing it for sharing is a how not so highly estimated task. And there's frequently limited academic credit. In my institutions, people say, okay, this has to be done by data managers. But in a way, often the financing of data managers to do this job is not available. If I go to our German research agencies, they say it's better to pay 10 more mice experiments as to spend the money for data management. I hope this will change during the next years. Everybody is, how to say, optimistic and saying, yes, we have to do it. I hope that activities like this Consort 2025 and Spirit 2025 are a big push in this direction. So data sharing is encouraged in principle, but the reward structure in practice is still discouraging this. And this goes now also to the career perspective of our students. I mean, we have risks and concerns if we think about data sharing. There is this fear of being skewed. There is this lot of extra work which you have to do to get your data sharing statements and your data prepared and in systems to be shared. We have this lack in a credit system, and even still tenure and hiring still emphasis papers which look on this not so much shared data sets. So the incentives are very unclear, and many institutions do not reward, to say, openness. There's this ethical and legal complexity which has to be learned. And even there is this fear to lose control of your data if it is given to public, and if its usage is unpredictable. But on the other side, you have a lot of benefits. This visibility and citation goes up. You develop a lot of skills which are very important. You learn about alternative outputs, and you learn that there are ways to promote this output and you to get credit for this output. It's a collaboration gateway. It joins you with a lot of other people and interesting networks. You learn in ethical lead. You learn a lot of issues a standard clinician does not know. And in a way, you are a kind of entering a kind of scientific stewardship, because you gain you gain an image of being a trusted steward, and with a work which enhance credibility and employability. Okay, so we have this optimistic career perspective. I think the pharma is providing this kind of careers already. They are much more open. They started 2012 in providing data sets to making accessible. They invest a lot of money in departments within the companies to share data, even to gain, by looking at their own data, to deeper insights. And they even have been very early. You have here this paper from 2016 where they formulate practical guidance how to do it. This is one of the outputs. Also, we hope for ShareCDT to come up with a very interesting second level or a new generation paper of this kind. So we discuss the challenges and the future directions. We challenge all these barriers, the systemic, individual, ethical, economical. We have in our teaching program also sessions where we can share and discuss about incentive structures. So there is we call it professional training. The next professional training in November is like discussing with people from pharma and from academic close institutions this kind of incentives and career ideas. We have to overcome these trust issues, and there are communities like the epidemiologists who did it, who overcame this, and who are using data sharing just to really get their science on a better move. We try to fill this training gap. The industry has a lot of training for data sharing. There's a lot of platforms providing this. We try to provide ideas and material to implement it in medical schools. And we hope there will be more activities like the Spirit and Consort thing to get it going. And so our teaching narrative would be every data set tells more than one story. Share it so others can hear their stories and give it with the public. Okay, we have a kind of vision. Clinical data are gifts from patients, and we should respect this. We are only guardians, and we are, in a way, forced or responsible to make the best out of it. So the next generation should not simply learn how to analyze data, but even how to internalize these sharing aspects. I think closed science, which is a common thing at the moment, is efficient in a short run. But in a way, if you go to open science, you have a more sustainable and resilient way to do science. And it's a way also to connect science again back to the social contract and the social aspects of trust, transparency, and responsibility. And in a way, what we like to be is a kind of light tower to illuminate the path of others by making data discoverable and usable. This is a very pathetic sentence, but without pathetic sentence, often you end up in despair. And so I come to an end, and I would like to summarize these many aspects we had. So clinical trial data sharing is a kind of interval. It's a praxis at making individual patient data, study protocols, analysis plans accessible to qualified researchers. And this qualified thing is an important aspect when you write a data sharing agreement. So we have, in theory, something which follows a lot of thinking roads of philosophers, social, what is this, not socialists, but sociologists and economists, and we fit in a way, and I hope that our general societal development keeps up in this direction. So we teach people about how to set up governance frameworks for the practice of data sharing. And then comes all these little technical things, standardization, things you have to do with patients if you go for consent, and then implementing in your environment enough incentives. So we see data sharing as a technical and a cultural shift. And I would like to end my talk, and thank you for your listening, with just repeating some of these philosophical quotes, which are in line with these activities of our own work. I don't know if you know Amartya Kumar Sen. He is an Indian economist, and he had a Nobel Prize, I think 24, and he is looking a lot of this economical efficiency if you combine community aspects and go on. And thanks a lot for your attention.